which is going to be comprised of two lectures. The first one led by Professor Emerita Mona Haggag, director of the Archaeological Society of Alexandria, and the second by Kyriakos Savopoulos, which I think we should once again thank for his time and his availability all this day long in the two sites we've visited. So please join me in thanking Kyriakos again. So our first speaker for this afternoon needs no further introduction. You all know her.
Actually, the subject of my presentation is very huge, and I tried as much as possible to epitomize it to fit for the half an hour duration. It's since the founding of Alexandria by Alexander the Great, the city developed rapidly and became the metropolis of the Mediterranean. And in spite of the glory and supremacy that Alexandria soon achieved, the tangible remains of such a glory have almost vanished. Apart from the discoveries at Kom el Dikka, the ruins of the Great Serapion, and the Ras Souda temple, only funerary complexes are partially maintained. Luckily enough, those funerary complexes of Alexandria give us a good idea not only about death and funerary practices, thank you, but also in the majority of cases, they give us an idea about the people and their life in the city. Here we shall confine ourselves to the artistic evolution of those sites which formed the beginning of what can satisfactorily be called the Alexandrian style. Alexandria had two huge cemeteries, one to the east of the city's borders and the other to the west. Unlike the Western Cemetery, which was a vast area completely devoted to burials, the Eastern one began with the same purpose, but because of the gradual and continued need for enlarging the city's area, funerary complexes are separated by domestic areas. In order to understand very well the beginnings of the traits of the funerary complexes at Alexandria, it would be better if we pass very quickly through the main characteristics of Macedonian tombs. Macedonian tombs actually began with cyst tombs dug in the ground and consolidated with masonry. They contain the body or the cinerary urn of the cremated bones together with grave goods from the possession of the dead person. The same case is in Shadbi, as old photos of the site taken by its discoverer indicate. You see, the Shadbi at the time of the discovery is full of surface monuments which had pits dug in front or under each monument as a burial location for the dead. With the rise of the Macedonian kingdom at the time of Philip II and Alexander the Great, royal tombs and tombs of military leaders and dignitaries turned into chamber tombs with a unified plan inspired by the domestic architecture of the oikos, of the home or of the house. This was a vestibule and a burial chamber. From temple designs, temple architecture, these tombs inspired the elaborate facades for the burial chamber, usually tetrastyle, Doric, or Ionic, or both. One of the most important characteristics in these facades is the central doorway flanked by false windows. Sometimes windows appear above the entrance. Here, for example, the windows are flanking the main central entrance, and there in the Lefkadia tomb, the windows are above the frieze. Entablatures were either complete with pediments or without, like this one. Some examples feature a two-storied facade with an attic, like this. After completing the process of laying the body and purifying it, the prothesis, the body is either inhumed or cremated and buried. The tomb is locked and intended to be locked forever. An artificial mound of earth and stones or debris, a tumulus, we call it tumulus, covers the tomb or a group of tombs. The weight of the tumulus necessitated strong sealing for the tomb construction, which is achieved by a barrel vault. Barrel vaults with keystone technique became an essential feature of Macedonian tombs throughout their stages of evolution. By the end of the 3rd century, and with the deterioration of Macedon as a kingdom, tomb facades began to be simplified gradually until they became completely plain. The tetrastyle turned into D-style, that means only 2 columns at the front, and illusionistic windows disappeared. It has always been concluded that the unique Alabaster Tomb of Alexandria is the earliest funerary monument from Alexandria's first decades of existence. The monument is one room which is believed to have been the vestibule leading to a burial chamber, according to the oikos plan of the Macedonian tombs, and for some, the tomb for some important person or even a royal member of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The stone from which the monument is constructed is a very precious one in Egypt and very well polished at the interior of the tomb, and it's left undressed from the exterior. This is preferably interpreted as the tomb was covered by a tumulus. Achille Adriani, who discovered and restored the monument, went to an assumption of relating it to Alexander the Great himself. The Alabaster Tomb is truly unique, because it is the only tomb in Alexandria which is constructed on ground surface. It is the only tomb made of this precious material, alabaster. It is the only tomb covered by tumulus in Alexandria. In the light of the previously mentioned characteristics and evolution of Macedonian sepulchres, the facade of our Alabaster Tomb is a Macedonian D-style Doric facade with very simplified decoration. This simplification leads us to relate the tomb to a late 3rd century date. During the last quarter of this century, literary sources inform us that Ptolemy IV, Philopator, collected the corpses of his ancestors and reburied them in a royal cemetery that he ordered to be created around the sacred tomb of Alexander the Great, and that he enriched this cemetery with a wall, peribolos, and most likely covered it with a tumulus. If Adriani is true, then one would assume that the Alabaster Tomb is part of the Royal Cemetery. But what about its location? In the late 90s, a team of Alexandria University, headed by the late Fawzi El-Fakharani, carried out investigations in the site around the Alabaster Tomb. I had the honor of being vice director of these excavations, with the aim of looking for the other parts of the tomb. However, trial trenches yielded a water well of definite Byzantine date at a level almost identical with that of the floor of the tomb. This confirms that the current location of the tomb is not the original location, and it was probably moved to this current site during Byzantine time. Then, if the Alabaster Tomb is late 3rd century, if this is correct, then what is the earliest tomb in Alexandria? It is, as you might expect me to say, Shadbi. Let us move to the earliest funerary complex in Alexandria, which is Shadbi Cemetery. Hypogeum A has many features in common with Macedonian tomb types. It lies directly close to the earliest phase of the Ptolemaic eastern walls. Hypogeum A is the earliest funerary complex ever in Alexandria. It has many features in common with Macedonian tombs of dignitary persons and even to the Macedonian royal sepulchres. It has the oikos design, vestibule and main room. It has the barrel vault, and even the barrel vault in room G, which is the main and earliest room, actually is concealed by a straight entrance. And this is a characteristic typical to Macedonian oikos plan. The elaborate facade for the burial location, tetra-style, as you see here, with central doorways and false windows. The illusionistic imitation of doors and windows is one of the main characteristics of Macedonian tombs, and it occurred in Shadbi everywhere, in room G, in room E, and in locally closing slabs from Shadbi. The same type of attached columns you see to the right, to the left, is one or a couple of attached columns from Macedonian tombs. And in Shadbi, the attached columns are being seen from both sides, and they are carved in one single rock, which is a Macedonian feature as well. Shadbi included inhumation and cremation using the Hadra Hydriae, which are the prevailing type of cinerary urns in Alexandria, and sometimes inhumation and Hadra Hydriae are in the same loculus, in the same slot for burials. And this is again a Macedonian feature. The gamma-shaped clinae, as in Macedon, in Greece, and in Asia Minor, in all the Greek world, the gamma-shaped is the prevailing design for creating the clini. But in Shadbi, the clini in Shadbi, to your right, up, are double clini. It's not for one burial, it's for two. And we found lately that it was for more than two because there were some kind of shelves in order to bear slabs for other burials. And double clini are very rare everywhere. They are attested in some places like Lydia, like Phrygia, like Thrace. but they are very rare phenomenon in clini. And the Shadbi clini are sarcophagi clini. They are not only for laying out the body of the dead to practice the processes, but they are again for burying the dead after the processes. If we come to then, up till now, the Alabaster Tomb, Shadbi, have many, many features in common with Macedonian tombs. What are the Alexandrian particularities then? Because not all the dead people buried in Shadbi were Macedonians, but a considerable number of other Greek origins were there, we find some additions which are not known elsewhere. The addition of a Greek-style relief stele at the front side of the clini. Can you see it here? At the center of the facade of the clini. This is a unique feature, actually. It is in the shape of a temple facade. And to emphasize this intention of the artist, the tomb carvers added half-identical stele at the visible part of the other clini in order to give the illusion that it was once complete. So he wanted to emphasize this characteristic. The big difference between Macedonian and Alexandrian burial places is that the Macedonian tomb is locked and intended to remain locked, as we said, while in Alexandria, visiting the tomb was one of the important activities of families and friends of the dead. After the processes and the disposition of the inhumed or cremated body, other rituals were to be performed, including the Totenmahl. The Totenmahl is a funerary meal to be prepared and eaten inside the tomb. In certain, they imagined that the deceased will join them while lying on his clini in this Totenmahl. In certain funerary occasions, relatives used to perform other rituals and provide offerings in honor of their dead. Because of all these processes, there should be places for the living people inside the tomb complex. The open court, which is the typical Alexandrian house plan, allowing light and air to the entire building, was borrowed to the architecture of tomb complexes. Hence, Alexandrian tombs combine the oikos plan, which is Macedonian, with the peristyle, which is an open court surrounded by attached columns from all sides, sometimes freestanding columns, or from three sides only, and hence we call it pseudo-peristyle. Usually the court is provided with a source of fresh water. It happened in Shadbi, in Mustafa Basha, in Amfushi, in most of the complexes. The fresh water is required for purification and other rituals. In Shadbi, it is a pseudo-peristyle, while in Mustafa Basha Cemetery, it is a peristyle. Greek architecture has always one column at the corner. It is a basic fact. No two columns meet at corners. The Alexandrian carvers of Shadbi tried, as Dr. Sobhi assumed when we were once there, that the reason for doing this actually is unknown, but Dr. Sobhi's assumption is trying to achieve more solid corners. Well, he noticed that this is unusual, and we did not know why, and we couldn't reach a conclusion. But my assumption is that the carver tried to achieve more solid corners in the rock-cut tomb, especially in such a weak mother rock. And this is plausible. The discovery of some fragments of huge blocks carved with care and maintaining parts of decorative cuttings usual for friezes may give us a clue about a sort of constructed entablature to have been surmounting the main entrance to the tomb complex. So there is heavy blocks over the entrance, and this should be consolidated with columns. Dr. Sobhi thinks that he was only trying things in order to cope with the new environment, and he couldn't, or he didn't manage to make thorough Greek architecture in such a rock-cut place. Shadbi complex provides the earliest examples of the Alexandrian loculi as burial slots carved in the walls of the burial chamber to accommodate one or more body and or also cinerary urns. It has been assumed that loculi are inspired from the Egyptian cemetery of the Apis bull mummies at Saqqara. After Shadbi, loculi became the prevailing type of Alexandria and the entire Hellenistic world. This fragment of Shadbi stele, decorated with the prevailing motif of a temple facade, combines the Macedonian shield as a decorative element at the tympanum, which in later Ptolemaic tombs is replaced by a winged sun disk, together with a mix of Doric and Corinthian Greek orders. In Macedonian and Greek tombs, usually the Doric and Ionic orders are mixed, not the Corinthian. So it is again another Alexandrian particularity. In this stele from Shadbi, the usual mixture of Doric and Ionic elements appear. It is the Macedonian illusionistic trend of imitating architectural designs, but the new Alexandrian creation of leaving the door semi-opened alludes to the continuous link between the world of the living and that of the underworld. This feature is repeated in a considerable number of sculpted and painted examples characterizing the Alexandrian style or Alexandrian particularities. Grave stele and locally closing slabs from Shadbi, as well as grave goods such as Hadra Hydriae, confirm the dating of the complex Hypogeum A to the end of 4th and early 3rd century BC. They also give us some information about the tomb owners and express the first steps of forming a society that can safely be described as cosmopolitan. You notice one here is Macedonian. One is from Olbu in the center. And this mother is from Cyrenaica. Yeah. And there are multiple of such, and Mustas. Mustas is very important because it's called Mustas Ammoniu. Ammoniu, son of Ammonius. And Ammonius may have connotation with Ammon. Nobody, well, it needs to be studied actually, but it puts a question about such an early name of a Greek girl and the name of her father. Hadra Cemetery, as you see in the map, to the north are the complexes, different complexes of Shadbi, and to the south is the Hadra Cemetery. It lies directly to the south of Shadbi in the fringes of what was known as Eleusis, began slightly later than Shadbi and continued until the end of antiquity. It has two circular tombs, which is a new feature actually, dated to the 3rd century, and two chamber tombs with oikos plan and peristyle. Azbet Makhlouf is part of Hadra Cemetery. Azbet Makhlouf was a small village at the fringes of Hadra Cemetery, and it was a cemetery as well, and dated to the 2nd century. And are characterized, the tombs in Azbet Makhlouf are characterized by their locally closing slabs decorated in the illusionistic style. The entire cemetery of Hadra has disappeared, and the only architectural unit that remained was moved to Shadbi site, to be left for us to restore and preserve, as you see. Other disappeared funerary monuments in Alexandria, as Professor Plansos mentioned yesterday, Ibrahimiyya tomb of mercenaries, which yielded a considerable number of painted tomb stele with a lot of information about the people resided in Alexandria. Sidi Gaber tomb dated to the 1st century, especially the one called the tomb of Tirsh, the discoverer, which had a court, loculus room, vestibule, cleaner room with illusionistic paintings and a loculus in the rear wall, dates to the end of the 3rd and early 2nd century. Antoniades' tomb, we are not sure if it's still extant or not, because nobody could see it for many decades now. It's 1st century, court and 6 burial chambers, vestibule to the main chamber, locally, Cluny in Antoniades turned into a decorative motif fulfilling the ritual of the prothesis. The complex discovered recently in Ard al-Haddad, near Shadbi, to the east of Shadbi, were discovered and soon dismantled. So, it had 4 chambers featuring rows of loculi. The big loss is the cemetery of El Abd area. This was another large cemetery of the 2nd half of the 3rd century, and it continued in use till the end of antiquity. It comprises almost all ways of dealing with the dead, various architectural plans, and a considerable number of grave goods. But unluckily, we don't have it anymore. The very famous sarcophagus of Sidi Gaber, which I don't know why was it famous. There is no reason actually, because it caused really a booming in the media at the time of its discovery, although it is just a small chamber tomb with looted locally, and inside the room a very large undecorated granite sarcophagus was located in a later time. Now, coming again to the remaining Mustafa Pasha complex. Following with the Alexandrian particularities, Mustafa Pasha tombs follow Macedonian Greek type of funerary architecture with the same plan that combines the oikos with the peristyle, the same palette of colors used in wall decoration, the illusionistic trend of architectural motifs, and using locally side by side with the cleaning. All these are features borrowed from Macedonian funerary architecture, but here it is noticeable that the columns, some of them are attached, semi-columns, and some are freestanding ones. But they are partially fluted. They are not entirely fluted from bottom to top. And this is a new phenomenon. Greek columns were completely fluted, with the exception of the archaic temple of Artemis at Ephesus, which was left a small part at the bottom of the column was left plain in order to add reliefs. So it's not the same phenomenon. The earliest partially fluted columns found in the Greek world is the Stoa of Delos, which is dated to the end of the 3rd century. And we are speaking about examples from Tomb 1 in Mustafa Basha, which is early 3rd century. And the second to follow Delos Stoa, the Stoa of Attalus at Athens, which dates to 150, middle of the 2nd century. So Mustafa Basha provide the earliest example of partially fluted columns. Yeah. It is the earliest example of such a type. The functionality of this phenomenon is yet ambiguous. One can assume that it was a sort of simplifying the decorative compositions of the architectural unit they are used in, especially that they are carved in a limited area. It is also plausible that the weakness of the mother rock they are carved in, all the eastern area of Alexandria, the mother rock is weaker than the west part. The weakness caused the architect to be cautious and trying to avoid scratches in the arises of the Doric flutes. Whatever the case was, it is obvious that the Alexandrian artist gave himself the freedom to execute his work according to the provided conditions of the new environment he is working in. One should not exclude the individual new approach to introduce some new aesthetic elements. In the court of Mustafa Basha, Tomb 1, the columns are high with relatively small diameter, which caused the intercolumnation to be wide. You see, the intercolumnation is very wide. The north and south friezes contain 3 triglyphs in each intercolumnation, with wide VI occupied by square metopes, while in the east and west friezes there are 2 triglyphs in each intercolumnation. Completely different. Here. This 2 triglyphs and this 3 triglyphs, and the same in the other 2 walls. This difference in arrangement seems to be necessitated to allow passing through the rooms that lie behind the east and west sides of the court. It seems that in the Alexandrian architecture there was no contradiction between the utility and functionality of the building and the beauty of its external appearance. The 3rd century Alexandrian funerary architecture looked generally Greek. Within the Greek-looking buildings, architects were free to create some new elements and designs that helped them to solve problems, material and function, in order to produce buildings with highly aesthetic appearance. From this idea, the Alexandrian particularities which we have noticed in the previously investigated monuments were derived. Throughout the 3rd century, Some elements were added to express the particularities of Alexandrian society as a society that incorporates Greek inhabitants neighbored by the Egyptians, who hold a deeply rooted history of funerary beliefs, which were reflected profoundly in their funerary art. The use of cavetto cornices, which began to appear, these are typically Egyptian, which began to appear as early as the Hadra Cemetery, is but one example of such elements. From the 2nd century BC onward, Egyptian elements found their way in the decoration and moldings of funerary architecture. This grave stele from Gabbari, Western Necropolis, provides the other face of the Alexandrian decorative program, where the Greek deceased, clad in hemation, is depicted standing at a doubled entrance of an Egyptian temple. The outer facade is flanked by 2 composite columns. The left one has disappeared, supporting the architrave, which is adorned by a huge winged scarabæus, then the Egyptian uraeus frieze. The inner facade has its architrave decorated by the sun disk, while the frieze has the typical Alexandrian square dentils. In spite of the fact that this stele, which hosts the Greek dead boy, is entirely Egyptian, the architect persists on inserting the Alexandrian square dentils into the Egyptian decorative program, probably denoting the deceased as a believer in the Egyptian funerary cult, but when entering the Egyptian realm of the dead, he insists on his Alexandrian identity. Amfushi Tomb complex represents part of the Pharos Island Cemetery, usually considered as part of the Western Cemetery, but it rather served people who resided the island. The turn from Greco-Macedonian decorative motifs into Greek-Egyptian program is well manifested in Amfushi Tomb 2, where the tomb passed through 3 successive phases of use, more likely to serve 3 successive generations of owners. The tomb has the traditional plan with the oikos design and peristyle, as you see the plan, provided by water sources for rituals. It has also the vaulted ceilings, which are decorated with the Greco-Alexandrian rhomboid and lozenges motifs painted in colors imitating stucco roof decorations. Wall decoration tend to use the typical Alexandrian division of plinths under a row of imitation of alabaster in the orthostat or lower section, followed by strips of black and white squares forming the chessboard motif in the upper. Tomb 2 in Amfushi, in the first phase, has Alexandrian Greek, or let's say Ptolemaic masonry style. Second phase has the chessboard motif, which is Alexandrian, with added squares depicting Egyptian crowns. Within the squares, there are blocks which has Egyptian hem crown and Peshen crown. Amfushi Tomb 5 expresses the real fusion of Greek, Macedonian, Egyptian elements. At the entrance, one can see what looks like an Egyptian naiscus, flanked by 2 composite columns, the Lesbian Kimation, Cavetto Corniche, Uraeus frieze, the Doric frieze, bead and reel strip, and the Alexandrian segmental pediment. Amfushi 5 in room 5 have their walls fully decorated with bright colors painting representing the Gardens of Eden. The earlier tombs of Alexandria bear the evidence for the insertion of some Egyptian elements within the Greek funerary atmosphere of the city's underground burial places. Throughout the 3rd century BC, individual Egyptian elements such as the sphinxes, the solar sun disk, and the curved pediments were added to the Alexandrian architectural styles to express the particularities of the Alexandrian society as a society that incorporates Greek inhabitants neighbored by the Egyptians who hold a deeply rooted history of religious and funerary beliefs, which were reflected profoundly in their architecture. By the end of the 3rd century and beginning of the 2nd century onward, Egyptian elements increasingly found their way into the decoration and moldings of funerary architecture until they became part of the overall layout of the architecture of Alexandria. The Egyptian curved pediment and broken lintel led to the use of more varied forms of entablatures like the broken and half pediments, which led to the creation of what can be termed as the Alexandrian Baroque architecture. This interaction of Greco-Egyptian elements seems to have a more profound background of cultural and social changes that might have been accompanied with a change in the funerary and religious practices in the city. The religious content and connotations of the Egyptian elements used in architecture became more appreciated among the Greek inhabitants of the city, if not adopted by the majority of them. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Mona, for such a detailed and wonderful overview of the monumental burial architecture in Alexandria, seen through the eyes of someone working mainly on style and fusion within these monuments. Thank you so much. I'm sure there will be many questions, but we thought it would be more rewarding to leave the discussion in the end, as soon as the second lecture is over. So our next speaker this evening is Kyriakos Savopoulos, which I call to the podium. And Kyriakos will be talking to us about the funerary architecture in Hellenistic Alexandria. Kyriakos?
Let's just give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So, good evening, everybody. What is that? Okay, it's there. Give me a second. Okay. So, welcome again to SATB again. Today I'll present to you my approach to funerary architecture in Alexandria, using as case study our rediscovery, I would say, of the cemetery of SATB, of the early Hellenistic cemetery of SATB. And I would call it rediscovery as I think already, as we've seen from the site, the plan is not the same anymore. We know much more about it, and we have much more finds than now we can build a new theory, a new context for this very important site. Unfortunately, I think, just making an introduction, that I think SATB Cemetery was discovered too early, before these kind of monuments being appreciated, let's say, as it happened in the 20th century. So while many monuments of this kind that you can find in Macedon or in Cyprus are already protected by UNESCO, for Sadby was already too late, already by the late 1940s or the 1950s, as you will see. But so allow me to present you some evidence of how we were inspired about this project and how also the research in the site developed since the time of discovery. I think it would be better, you will be able to understand what are the tasks of these projects and why we focus in specific, let's say, objectives on it. So the Hellenistic Cemetery of Sadby is situated today in the heart of the modern city of Alexandria, in front of St. Mark College, that you have seen most probably, too close to the Library of Alexandria and the University of the city. And this area in antiquity would be very close to the east walls of the Hellenistic city. We assume that the wall should have been upon the axis of Akralochias, of Selcella, so most probably should be on or very close to the present-day Suez Canal Street. So in this area should have been just a few hundred meters from the east city walls and the district of the royal quarters situated at the back. And so we need to take into account also the topography of the site. Of course, this site will be occupied for about 2 centuries, as we understand today, and will be later incorporated in the development of the city eastwards and will be part of a domestic area, at least in its surface. Indeed, there is evidence for the Roman period, at least. So I was able to trace some photos, early photos, from the archive of the Greco-Roman Museum of Alexandria, from the glass negative archive, about the appearance of the site before the excavation. Although the interest for the site and for the area of Sadby goes back to the last quarter of the 19th century, you can read some names that are referred in the reports of the first excavator of the area. So we know about a certain Ioannidis and Count Max Zogier, Bempugioli, so local people, early local explorers. Of course, none of them was really interested about the locally as we do or the whatever. So they were looking for the tomb of Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, clearly. So even famous Heinrich Schliemann came in Alexandria searching for the tomb of Alexander. So he tried to take a permission to dig in the area of Nabi Daniel Mosque, and they said, Mamnua, it's forbidden because there are some royal tombs related to the family of Muhammad Ali. So he got disappointed, and then he got the advice of Zoyeb, why don't you dig in Selcella and close to Sadby? You might find Cleopatra. Okay, so he tried as well. He got disappointed twice, and then he preferred to take a cruise to the Nile. He got sick, he returned back to Greece, and then he died. So that's the contribution of Schliemann in Alexandria. The first serious investigations in the site begin by the Greco-Roman Museum of Alexandria, which was founded in 1892. So about 7 years after that, Giuseppe Botti, the first director of the curator of the Greco-Roman Museum, initiates excavations in the area, which were unfortunately for him interrupted by his death. And so he was succeeded by another Italian, the 26 years old at that time, Evaristo Breccia, who continued the excavation in the area. He is considered the main excavator of the site, and we owe the site to him, that is still preserved. You can see in the middle the excavation of Breccia. You see he excavated a much larger area from what is preserved today, which is only this part. And allow me to say in advance, like giving the news that now we can read much better this map than before, isn't it? So we know exactly why he has too little evidence in certain points, and you will see why. Here are also some photos from the area that are colorized, some successfully, some not by me. These are some of the above-ground monuments that he discovered. I think he mentioned about 50 of them, that only 7 survive today. Most probably you have seen some of them around. This is Breccia, the excavator. Of course, the most important discovery of Breccia was hypogeum excavation, was hypogeum A, but again, we're giving more attention now to his text in his monograph, The Necropolis of Sadby, when he says that there was a permanent layer of mud and water that most probably did not allow him to consolidate his excavation. Now we see that he stopped at least 50 centimeters to 1 meter higher than the original ground level of hypogeum A. So not only that, he decided, I guess, to build a staircase accessing the hypogeum A from the south side of the complex. Let me get down to the complex. This is one of his few photos. He gave us just a few photos about the site. We had many, I have to repeat it, we have many open question marks about certain parts of the site. This is one of the false windows that were still standing, let's say, on the walls of Sadby, Auli, and as it was mentioned also during our visit, and as we see now, that one of the two shutters is depicted as being semi-open, and as Professor Mona mentioned, that indeed this is a very early element of illusionism in Alexandria, implying that there is life, activity inside this complex. So it's not just a closed and sealed place. And of course, this is an expression, indication of the continuity of the relationship between the living and the dead. Also, from another point of view, and you can see also here the stairs that were built, I think, just after the excavation. And again, some faces of the place. This photo was taken by Peter Fraser in the 1950s upon his visit. Not me. And sure, it's not me. No. And so what I would like you to compare with your eyes is what you see today and what was really there. So all this, even this part that you see here, was built by Breccia because he stabilized the ground in a higher level, and then he put a lintel, as you see. It could be a lintel 1 meter higher than the gateway. So important for the next slide. This is how it was the site inside, and with the colorization of the photo, we can see now that there is water, okay, which was not really visible in the black and white photo. Also, we can see and we can understand what are these blocks. And you will see later again. So sometimes he used ancient blocks, making a pavement, making a walkway inside the rooms, even including loculus slabs that he opened. All these were fascinating surprises that we had from Dr. Breccia, God bless his soul. Some of his designs, linear designs that he provided, very interesting and very helpful to understand what was about. This is room E, or as we call it today, the Philotechnos Hall. And this is how it used to be during the excavation of the place. So as we say, everything was sealed with nice false doors painted. Now, before moving at this point, this is how more or less his publication, his monograph has finished. So he gave us a couple of photos, a description of the site from the north side towards the south. And then we had the good and the bad news. So the good news about the site is that he managed to convert his excavation to a visiting archaeological site. Perhaps, I don't know if it is the very first site that excavated systematically by Archaeological Society and the museum turning into a visiting place, a visiting site. So that was a success for him. Most of the sites are not preserved in Alexandria after excavation. The bad news about the site is that there was no plan upon the discovery about protecting the site from its future deterioration. The site will be exposed to weather conditions, plus there will be invasion of water, and the water will remain from underground. Sorry. Adding also that all the soil that was left around in the site, so the site more or less remained as an open excavation to the public. So all the soil that was left in the site will return to the underground structures as invading mud. The site will be covered again almost completely. The very fragile mother rock will be eroded to the level that would allow even water to pass through the top surface inside the place. So this is how the site used to be. In our first visit in 2019, we decided we should work on the project. As you see, most of the area of the underground is covered. You can see the comparison. So here, this part you see here is more or less here, and all the wall that you see here is already covered, and the opening has already been built by a combination of new blocks, ancient blocks, and bricks. Not to mention what is the situation inside. It will turn into a swimming pool, plus, I don't know, there were fishes inside even. Not a pleasant place. So sooner or later, the site turned into invisible both to visitors and archaeologists. I would only have to mention the revisiting, the excavation of the Service of Antiquities in the 1990s outside the area of Sadby, and also the revisiting of Hypogeia, of the minor Hypogeia B and C by Augsburg University. It was the only exceptions in all this period. So this is more or less what was our idea. It's an old idea. Sadby is not a new idea, but it is not easy to find sponsors and supporters for such a task. After a long time and after many discussions, we were happy to have the support of the A.G. Leventis Foundation. So under the concession of the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities of Egypt, we initiated a project, the Alexandria Necropolis project, and the first phase would be the complete revisiting of the Hellenistic tombs of Sadby, having the tasks you can read here. So more or less, you can see what we have done since that time. We had to protect and restore the site, to consolidate the incomplete archaeological investigation, and also to go one step further towards a new research and complete research, up-to-date research for the site, which will be based in the production of a 3D model that will be created by the Cyprus Institute that are collaborators in this project. But let me stay in the excavation part. An excavation for Sadby means, first of all, you have to remove tons of garbages as was left at that time. After that step, we have step by step starting to remove this thick layer of mud that was concentrated until we finally reached the layer of breccia and slightly beyond that. So you could see even the staircase could not serve anymore because they would stop at that level. The staircase is built, and this is how it used to be in October 2021, after we reached, let's say, the underground level. And still, from the photos you see, there is another at least 50 centimeters under this layer. So our attention turned to the south side, because as you see, we have seen already some traits of wall. I have to mention that Breccia was never able to see this part, most probably. So he mentioned in his text that he found the south side of the site rough. And because it was rough, he decided that he concluded that the entrance of the tomb was to the south because it was to the north, because it was the only remaining side for having an entrance. All the rest of the west and the east sides are occupied by chambers. But, we saw that the staircase that was built from this side has created serious problems of stability and cavities to the surface, and indeed it was not a safe place it was not safe to keep the stairs at that site anymore. So we decided to remove the stairs and move the rough wall backwards a bit. But to our astonishment, we discovered that the place was not rough at all. Actually, there was a freestanding wall bearing architectural decoration from both sides, bearing the exact same decoration, and there was in the middle a gateway. And this is the very moment, I think the very first days when this appeared to our eyes. So let's see it more carefully. This is not the model of that was created by Cyprus Institute at all. I made it myself in Google SketchUp. So just to be able to see how the two sides were. So we are at the south side of the south wall, and we see that this central gateway is flanked by 3 semicolumns to each side. Also, another interesting aspect was that we found a doorstep that was actually a block in second use. Obviously, it was in second use because usually triglyphs and metopes appear in the entablature and not on the ground. But it was not what would have been in Macedon, for example, when the door will be sealed with blocks. Because when we turned to the other side, we saw that this doorstep, this block, has a stone step in front of it. So definitely at the point, that the doorstep was visible and there during the use of the place. Now, the question is, of course, why the wall was dismantled. This wall was dismantled, most probably for reasons of stability. We may start from that. We don't know if it was dismantled or collapsed, or both. And, but anyway, we cannot claim anymore that there was a rough wall, and actually it makes more sense to me, at least now, that this south wall is the facade of the tomb, because it provides access to the court. And if there is one common element in Alexandrian hypogeia, is the connection between the entrance and the court. All Alexandrian tombs are unique in design, in all possible ways, in cutting, and of course in decoration. If there is one common thing, is that staircases provide, rock-cut staircases provide access to the court, to the west, to the south, to the north, all over the cemetery. So at least it makes some sense now, the plan that was not easily readable according to the suggestion of the first excavator. And another interesting aspect is that we see, and I think most probably this is also practical addition at the time of the construction of the tomb, that we have this zone of blocks lined around the room. And these blocks, as you see here, are inserted in the rock-cut structure, providing most probably further support, while from this side, see this line is actually much thicker, it's double compared to the other sides. Most probably because it was freestanding and needed extra support. Now, entering inside, you can see, I think I found this photo quite informative about how the site was found and how it became after our excavation. And the cleaner room inside, that was, I think, again, in October 2021. And again, there were a lot of astonishments, actually, in this investigation. In front of the niches, to the side of the cleaner chamber, we discovered the traits of Hadra Cemetery. And we go back to the text of Brecha, who said that the niches were found emptied. No, the niches were once emptied, but most probably tomb robbers entered to the tomb, tried to find treasures, and they put them down and broken. So, in fact, it was found at the mud that Brecha was not able to investigate during the first investigation. Now, you may see now what happened to the other side, to the inner side of the back wall. This is the facade, the inner side of the facade of the east chamber. So you may see in this photo that, in fact, only this part should have been part of the original structure. These blocks, in fact, they stand on the base of the semicolumns, once used to be the entrance of the room. And it's more clear as you see here. So these parts are modern additions during the restoration that created this wall. I believe that if we would make any attempt to remove any brick from this, it would have collapsed altogether. So it has to stay there as it is. We discussed at the very beginning what we do with that, but it would be just the end of the whole structure if we moved any part of this. Surprises, further surprises. I'm not going to present finds actually in this presentation, but it helps us understand how the site and the environment of the site works. One of my favorite discovery, and this is this little miniature altar, is inscribed and is dedicated to the noble spirit, to Agathos demon of a certain lady called Euterpe. So it's, I think it's an unicum in many terms. First of all, it's the first inscribed miniature altar found in Alexandria, the first mentioning of Agathos demon in epigraphy of Alexandria, and most probably also Euterpe is the first time is mentioned in Alexandrian cemeteries. And give us a first idea, perhaps it's the very first element we have for cults of individuals in the tombs, for the cult of the dead in Alexandria tombs. We don't find much finds usually inside the tombs of Alexandria. Now, this is the before and after of Philotechnos Hall, which also gave us many surprises as we have seen today. We found pits, reduction pits. I think it's the very first time that a reduction pit is found in Alexandria, in this loculus. And now, what about the north side, the north side of the site? As I said, the first excavator suggested that the entrance was from the north side. But now that we see more clearly what happened to the north, I think we have to doubt a lot that was ever a gateway as an entrance from that side. First of all, it's clear in the area that there has been extraction of stone, systematic extraction of stone. The place has been used, to me, as a quarry. Then, looking to the supposed spot, so Breccia saw, I think he saw this part and he thought, okay, this is the entrance. But looking more carefully, what happens under that? We see that the cutting of stone, it's nothing to do, I think, with the proper gateway. It's just the extraction of stone that continued up to the entrance of this room that made people to stop extracting stone from this area. And of course, it was in this, was it this locally, Mona, that the two hadras were found? Yes? Okay. So some of the finds, as I said, we still work on this material. We do research, and of course, Professor Sopiasur and Professor Dmakis are also, for this reason, here, not just as visitors, are part of our research team. So you will have news very soon, I hope. Now, let me do my contribution about how Macedon, the relationship with Macedon. So the closest example that I found to this supposed facade in Sadbi is the so-called judgment tomb from Lefkadia. And this is because it's the only tomb that has 3 columns, 2 flanking the entrance. All the rest, Macedonian tombs, usually have 2 or 1. Even in Macedon, we see that there are not 3 columns, but they will have pilasters at the very end. So, but if there is something to be close from Macedon to our facade, I would suggest that it's something like that, which is also dates in the same more or less period. Now, but of course, the style is not enough, I think, in order to understand what are the similarities and the differences between Macedonian tombs and in Alexandria. And only by comparing the plan, I think it's very clear what is the main difference. In Alexandria, hypogia are complexes, are combinations of tombs, where in Macedon are usually a single monuments. So you can compare, the comparison I think is not valid at this stage in the comparison of plans. Even if I get the most elaborated Macedonian tomb, which is the multi-chamber tomb of Pella, I can compare only one section of Sadbi with this, plus that in Macedon, these are not locally but proper chambers. So again, the comparison doesn't go that far. And although the excavators claim an Alexandrian influence to their monuments. Now, I only have to add to that we traditionally see the relationship between Macedon and Alexandria as one-way relationship from Macedon to Alexandria. Just to put in the discussion that the earliest thing we know for Hellenistic Thessaloniki, the main harbor of Macedon, was the Serapeum of Thessaloniki. And the Serapeum of Thessaloniki was used as a naval station. So it was serving the relationship between Alexandria and Macedon. To me, after the 3rd century BC, I would speak about a cross-regional relation. I would expect all the architectural revolution that took place to Alexandria to have affected also Macedon. So I think we should talk about a two-way connection. Perhaps that's my suggestion, and I'm very happy, so I'm just taking you for the discussion afterwards. Now, I am one of the supporters of the idea that, yes, indeed, the locally have to do with a tradition, with an Egyptian tradition. And first of all, it's a practical aspect in the Alexandrian tombs. The use of space, they have to make a proper use of space, a wise use of space, because the city is huge. A city that has reached the 500,000 people or 300,000 people needs enough space also for the dead of this large society. So first of all, the locally serves those cells, serves a nice distribution, let's say, and proper use of the space. We do found locally in Alexandria, in Egypt, since the 8th or the 9th century BC, two classical examples, I think, the Secretarial Necropolis that develops from the 8th century BC down to the late Roman period has exactly the same idea, that they need to make a proper use of the available space underground. We do have locally also in the Serapeum of Alexandria, although for a period it was understood as the library of the Serapeum, but that makes no sense to have an underground library, first of all, and you should not ignore the note of Alaki that says that he found animal bones inside these areas. People used to forget this little detail. But locally, in Egypt, are not used only for animals. They're used also for humans. And the evidence, it comes also from the nearby area of Alexandria, and more specifically from the area of Canopus. So this is a plan of the excavation of the Italian mission of Alexandria in the so-called Nelson Island. Is directed by our good friend, Professor, and of the Society, Professor Balocalo. So Professor, in that area, he excavated the earliest Hellenistic settlement in Egypt ever, dating from actually before Alexandria, when the settlement in the Nelson Island existed, Alexandria was still under construction, and the site seems to be abandoned by the very beginning of the 3rd century BC. So there, he discovered this cemetery that has some interesting features. First of all, you see that there is a complex here of 3 subsequent rooms. At the very last one, there are 5 loculi. And inside those loculi, he discovered 5 mummies dating to the mid-4th century, to the 30th dynasty. Yet, he had more surprises as he discovered another gateway here. And he entered to another room where he found Greek-style funerary cleaner. And in the middle of this room, there was also a very nice coin from the days of the Ptolemaic satrapy, of Ptolemy Soter's satrapy in Egypt. So if there is a story to be told about this, that first of all, practices including locally, and this rock cut locally, were applied in the area of Alexandria before the existence of the city. And the first Greeks, like those of the area of the Nelson Island that later moved in Alexandria, learned about these techniques and also adopted their own funerary customs next to them. And I think Hadra Cemetery is in fact a more elaborated plan of what was the experiment, let's say, of the people on the Nelson Island. Now, another comment. So, because we have many students, I have some points that I'm happy to discuss and to give more explanations. Who's the tomb in Alexandria? In Macedon, for example, the tomb belongs to the dead. That's very clear. The whole structure, the decoration, the architecture, all the grave goods stay exclusively in use by the dead. And of course, the tumulus will cover everything. But this is not exactly the case of Alexandria. Not only the tombs remain accessible, but another interesting note we had in Sotheby, and not only Sotheby, is that there is monumentality and decoration only in the areas that are accessible by the living. In the locally, always remain rough, so the place, the spot that really belongs to the dead takes no serious, let's say, decorative interest. So I think that a tomb, a hypogeum, like hypogeum A, is actually a shared place. It's a shared place between the worlds of the living and the dead, and it is built in order to accommodate this relationship between the two worlds. And I think all these, the collective character of the tombs, the appearance, the environment serves this relationship. Now, we don't know, as you see in my very last part, that it should have been organized according to the socio-cultural principles of the living. But in the case of Sotheby, it's really difficult to imagine without epigraphy or without descriptions what are these principles that bring these people together as a group in this tomb. There should have been a connection which is not exactly the same place of origin, because I don't think they have the same place of origin. We have people from Asia Minor, Crete, Macedon, Thessaly, Libya. So there is something else. And if I may suggest, and of course it's totally open for discussion, what is the relationship of these people with the city that is just inside the city walls? The structure, to me, it's an elite structure, but the people buried in Sotheby are not the rich landowners that we find, for example, in Fayum. They have a status, a certain social status that allow them to have a proper monumental, let's say, burial place. But the grave goods are poor. So they're not the rich people that you could expect, for example, as high officials or whatever. So maybe there are people of the court, of the district. I mean, people that used to work there. So as they used to be organized in their daily life, while they're working for the palace or the palace area, these people were transferred to the area outside, continuing the life in the same way, and then we have generation by generation using the same spots. So it's not that, let's say, if, the son would be buried next to the father, but as we most probably see, the son is buried in the same loculus or in the same sarcophagus with the father. So these people are not necessarily members of the same family. I mean, the people that occupy. There is another connection between them, among them, that I cannot find yet. Hopefully we'll have more ideas about it later. Now, Alexandria Hypogeia as funerary temples. I think in the case of Mustafa Kemal, it was more obvious this effect of the idea of that the tomb is not only a residence, but as it's clearly in Sotheby, but also a temple. And this temple serves this relationship between the living and the dead. So the courts, the altars, in several cases, temple-style appearances, all serve these ideas. And so far we know that we have cultic practices for individuals, like euterpy, but that should have been also collective practices for this cast of people that would have shared the same hypogeum. So I don't think that the altar in the middle of the courtyard serves only the day of the funeral, but there should have been frequent post-funerary rites taking place, renewing the relationship of the living with their ancestors. And please feel free to ask me what would have been this inspiration, because I have a little thought about it. Now, last May, I went to a conference in Vergina. And while I was ready to be very, bold, look the complete plan, whatever, and while I'm entering to the plane, I received these photos from Professor Mona Haggag with no word. So step by step, I realized what happened. And this destroyed my lecture in a way. But anyway, I was happy. So we are in this area, ladies and gentlemen, here in this little loculus, this shallow loculus of the room G with the funerary cleaner. So at the back of this loculus, there was this hole, as you see. And behind this wall, there was another space, another loculus, where there was a dead inside. The interesting part, the more interesting part actually, is that this loculus actually was not, let's say, an extension of the loculus we had in front, but its entrance was at the backside. So it was still sealed with its own loculus, which is still here. And this practically means that there is a loculus to be entered from here. So, and what is going on in this area? This area is left blank by Breccia. It was never excavated. And let me say now as a Shakespearean, you know, Tomb B or not Tomb B, to be continued, correct? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos, for yet another inspiring lecture. And, putting more words in the pictures and the images we've all seen today during our site visits. I'm sure you are already overwhelmed by critical thinking and questions and queries. And I would also like to ask Mona to join us. Thank you. So feel free to fire away any of our speakers, no matter the order. Yeah, please, Professor Planzos. Is there a mic going around? Otherwise, you can speak up.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for this double feature of great presentations, and these were both very illuminating. And I would like to ask, or first of all, make a comment and then ask your opinion about this relationship. Thank you. You both commented on the relationship between Alexandria and Macedonia, and I'm glad to hear that neither of you really agree with the idea that one copies the other, or actually that Alexandria copies Macedonia. I must say that I was recently surprised to hear that there were even people thinking that there is a direct reference to Macedonia in Alexandria, that Alexandrian monuments either revive or continue or refer to Macedonian burial monuments directly. I agree with Kyriakos explaining how, well, first of all, style is not enough, and how the importance of the courtyard for the Alexandrian monuments. But also I would add that iconography is not enough either. That what we're looking in Macedonia, in my mind, has nothing to do with what we're looking in Alexandria. We see pillars, we see facades, we see pseudo windows and pseudo doors, but I always thought that in Macedonia, these are the entrances to, not to houses, but to the palace of Hades and Persephone. And this is why it's exclusive. You can't enter. No one can enter there. This is a place you're not supposed to be as a living. You're not supposed to stand outside. You're not supposed to call the names of the dead standing outside, because they might come out. That's why they never write their names on the facades, the names of the deceased. So I certainly agree with Kyriakos saying that what we have, the main feature of these complexes, of this chamber, these complexes of chamber tombs is the courtyard. And of course we need to think about the function of the courtyard and the function of the loculi a bit more. But I would really urge everyone to stop thinking that the Sidor architectural facades in Alexandria are the same as the Sidor architectural facades in Macedonia. And at least for Macedonia, we have the Orphic text. We know what we're supposed to be doing. When you're dead, you go, you stand in front of the, like in the tomb you just showed, you stand in the days of the after-death experience, you're encouraged to call for the judges, and they will judge you and lead you to the land of the blessed. So this is not what's going on in Alexandria. We don't really know what it is, and perhaps we can discuss the locally a bit later. But thank you. I don't know if you want to comment on this, but I think we all agree here.
Yes. No, nobody can say that the early Alexandrian funerary complexes were imitating Macedonian tombs. No, not at all. But the people who came to reside in Alexandria afresh at the beginning and at the founding of the city, from where do they get their elementary traits in order to express what they believed in for the underworld, and how can they do the practices they are used to do in their homeland? If they are Macedonians, they would think a Macedonian way. If they are from Thessaly, from Thrace, they would do the same. And we have these all, because although the inscriptions that are uncovered from Alexandria are very, very limited and rare, but at least we have literary sources, we have some tombs still with names and with denoting the origin of the deceased. So I think we have some ideas about their wish to convey or to express what they believed in a way or another. It could be this element from Macedon, this element like a loculus from Egypt or from Nelson's Island, and the court from the general Hellenistic architecture, which have some origins in Alexandria itself. No imitation, no identical appearance, but at least there are traits from here and there.
Which means that we need to work on the interpretation of the Alexandrian locally complexes.
Yeah, this needs further studies, of course, yes. Because also we have it all over the Hellenistic world. Well, I cannot say that I've seen everything, but I saw a lot of Hellenistic cemeteries in Greece, at least, with locally, and they are the majority of them are not yet dated definitely. So I think the study should cover the Hellenistic remains in Greece, in Asia Minor, and in Egypt.
So, from my point of view, I never use the term influence for many things, not only for this. But definitely, to me, there is a common stylistic. There are common references. We need to understand why these common references appear. First of all, let me add that there are no other ways in Greek architecture of expressing monumentality. Correct. So if you build a facade and you have to use the Doric order or the Ionic order, in the end everything would look like a temple or like the entrance of a house or whatever. So in the end, similarities appear by the strict, let's say, options that you have within the style of.
You don't mean the same thing.
Of course. Then I would search why the similarities by comparing the places. in Macedon, and especially in the area of Pella, for example, we have also a palace, we have a courtyard, and we have a capital. So I could expect Alexandria and Pella to develop certain hierarchies, certain court people that would have to express their status through monumental tombs. And as I said before, they conclude between Doric or Ionic order or something similar. Then I find many scholars doing so bold conclusions by using the same 3 and 4 tombs from a city once used to have 500,000 people, which means that we would never expect in Alexandria a facade like the one we have in Sadby. Nobody would expect a facade. And I would understand that, in fact, it was not, let's say, cut from up to downward, but like that. That's a new thing for us. And I think every time we dig this, the necropolis, there will be something new.
You mean the new facade in
Yeah.
Sadby? But this is a facade to the courtyard, not a facade to a...
To the complex, at least. So, again, there should have been a staircase like in the Tomb of the Kings in Paphos, like Tomb 8 there, that leading down to the facade. Every time there is a new surprise and every time there is new evidence. I don't think that we have enough material for making bold conclusions. I would expect even a proper Macedonian tomb with tumulus. Why not? In Alexandria. Why?
That would mean a clear transfers from Macedonia to...
Exactly. Of course, there is a reason why these people... Yes. And of course, there should be another reason why all in Macedon and here they like this, not this sort of oikos, of course. But I think you have in your mind a recently published thesis called Macedon Alexandria, something like that. Was disappointing.
Polish, yeah.
Horrible PhD had to
Really?
critique written by an Egyptian, but
Yeah, just to...
A Polish student who made
this idea that, but we're all in agreement, so.
Yeah, so anyway, we can discuss further, but this is my point of view.
Yes, please. Yeah.
In Alexandria also, I mean, speaking about Chadbi, there were nearby palaces as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the palace architecture surely have had its impact on such things. But there is one important fact between the Macedonian and the Alexandrian, which, as you, Professor Plansos, assume that they did not imitate each other, that the Macedonian tombs were for single individuals and to be locked upon them. But none of the Alexandrian was like that, unless the Alabaster Tomb is interpreted correctly. So we are not sure about this. That the Alexandrian tomb were family tombs, or began at least as family tombs. Then they became collective tombs for everybody. Thank you.
If I may slightly jump in the discussion, picking up from your very last point, to me, in my mind, we're talking about two completely different structures. And in my point of view, they have many more differences than similarities. And a key factor, a key thing that we should not overlook and leave to the side is that Macedonian tombs, proper Macedonian tombs, were not rock cut, locally. Yeah. The stone was brought from elsewhere. So there was this huge workload to prepare the ground in order to set the monument. And then again, days, if not weeks, if not months, to pile up the burial mound on top of the monument. Whereas here we're talking about rock-cut hewn complexes, chambers, call them, name them, whatever you like, in situ, by experienced workers, either name them Egyptians, which means that their experience was coming from, tradition and things like that, or people brought from elsewhere that they already had this sort of experience to cut the stone. And in my mind, the overall burial expenditure devoted on proper Macedonian tombs has absolutely nothing to do. It's much more than anything to do with the Alexandrian ones. And another thing is that the Alexandrian tombs, as you said, Mona, are collective monuments. So the key thing there is to question to which social groups they were addressed, they were destined. Because they were destined for many people, not just one. So either we're talking about social groups along the lines of lineage, along the lines of professional interests, of other sort of socio-political endeavors, who knows? But they have more differences rather than similarities. And another thing, coming to your lecture, Kyriakos, something you mentioned again at the very end of your lecture, the fact that we get poor tombs, like very poor burial goods, burial offerings within the tombs, does not necessarily mean that these were the graves of poor people.
But I mean, there are no gold grave goods.
But still, they were buried within such like monuments. They are impressive, no doubt. They are amazing. They're stunning. Yeah. They're stunning. But burial offerings, their quantity and quality does not equal the economic value of the individual buried therein, especially when they are buried in such like monuments. They might have no burial offerings at all and be buried in burial monuments like that. And we do know, at least in mainland Greece, that something like 60 to 70% of the Hellenistic graves proper are either unfurnished or with limited burial offerings. So we have to play along these lines of investigation as well. It's not that simple. I mean, interpreting burial customs in the Hellenistic period, at least, more than anything else, is no simple at all.
The Keramikos did not yield gold.
We don't have proper Hellenistic burials there, but just a few of them. Most of the tombs there are either archaic or classical or much earlier, of course, but not proper, not that many. And it's a funny thing. I was reading a recent study about burial offerings from Hellenistic burials in Keramikos, the few ones. And the scholar was writing that I'm not going to pay attention to the Hellenistic burials because their burial offerings are statistically
poor.
Exactly. Which does not make sense.
Yes.
You do not leave your data because they do not fit. You do not fit your data out of your interpretation because they do not fit in your argument. So that's methodologically wrong. So, but back to you. Any more questions or something you'd like to share with the group?
Okay, sorry,
Yes,
if
please.
you would allow me. Well, it's more interaction or more comments than a question. Well, two things. I've got two things. Number one, it's when Professor Mona was talking about El-Abd. I just wanted to share something because I was touched when you mentioned about it because it's very close to where I live. I used to see it every day. It was unique. It was beautiful, and I'm wondering why it was not saved. I mean, at least, well, I understand that they need to build something for the currently live people. But for example, we have something saved like Tigran tomb. It was found somewhere, and it was just dismantled to protect it, and they are displaying it at the catacombs. So. I used to see it. There were some paintings left on it. There were some stairs, many stairs. It was so many levels, I believe, because I used to have a look at it every day. I loved it. It was 3 levels. I believe even it was maybe in a condition better than it should be. So I feel really, really sorry for it. I wished if they find some things like this, they dismantle it at least. Okay, if you want to have the land for building anything, and they display it somewhere else, especially when, well, I believe that what we have now in Alexandria, it's not even 20% of what was Alexandria. So, of course, more than El Abd should be everywhere. Let me tell you something that nowadays, like 2 days ago, there was a land in front of El Ibrahimiyya station. It was left for years. And you know, guess what? When it was just left and used as a garage, I was happy because I know there is something downstairs hidden. I felt secure for it. But now, 2 days ago, they start digging and smashing everything. I don't know if the Ministry of Antiquities has an idea about this, but I really feel sorry for these things. That's just an interaction with you, just a thought. The second thing, if you would allow me as well, it's when you said about the Irshad localism, you mentioned something like two people could be buried in the same locally and has no connection. Well, let me think with. Sorry?
Did I say so?
Yes, well, I believe I understood this. Everyone were relative?
Oh, sorry, I got it.
Perhaps with the reduction.
Okay, no, I was just thinking that some way I believe that a lot of things survived and we do it way or another in our society. So let me think with you, like nowadays, when suddenly dies, like suddenly and has nowhere to bury, so other family has no connection with this person, would allow someone different to be buried with them without any connection. They believe this is a good thing. It's not a religious, it's just something, you know, well, it could be survived from these days. I'm just, you know, thinking with you, and that's it. Thank you.
Okay. For El Abd. El Abd is a long story to tell. It's not the suitable timing to speak about it, but well, the overall idea was that El Abd belongs to a landowner, and you know that the area is very, very expensive, and it's counted by centimeter, not by meter. Yes, and the ministry at that time did not have enough money to compensate the landowner. There were some suggestions for other solutions, but also they could not afford anything of it. It's a kind of economic superficial understanding, lots of problems. But to calm you down, the most important parts, like the cleaner, like the painted steel, like some of the locally ceilings, are kept. They are dismantled and maintained, and they are kept in stores, and one day maybe we shall see them again. So, and it is completely and very well documented before being dismantled. So don't be so sad because it was like that.
I just wanted to be visited like it should be, you know, to be touristed outside.
No, no. You may see one day some elements from El Abd, but you won't visit.
In Arabic, it's the military barracks, the necropolis of Mustafa. I'm sorry, a question. In necropolis to Mustafa Pasha, the necropolis. The necropolis of Mustafa Pasha, it's Hellenistic age.
Yes.
Hellenistic, huh? And the Abd is where exactly?
It's all ages, from the 3rd century until the end of antiquity.
I see.
We had Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine.
And I'm sorry, when we say Neapolis, all the Alexander outside the walls, Neapolis, the site of Neapolis. Neapolis, New Town. It starts where? Neapolis.
You mean Nicopolis?
No, Neapolis.
They mean
New city.
The area that was added after the extension of the walls, not Nicopolis.
Before Nicopolis.
What Neapolis is mentioned by Breccia in the...
Yes.
And the walls were here, near the library of the intramuros,
The Hellenistic walls.
Hellenistic ones.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Edge
see.
ones. Then it was expanded eastward.
Yes. Another more question. When you mentioned about the Abukir Nelson's Island, there was before Alexandria, it was near Nafkratis. Nafkratis was where exactly? Nokratis.
It's further inside in the delta.
Further inside. The islands has nothing to do with the site of the town of Nafkratis. It's further. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you.
Dr. Fathia Gaber, the head of the Greek-Roman archaeology department.
Thank you, my dear professor, for your great presentation. We always learn from you every time. I have a question and comment for Tomely tombs, like as you have said, that it was intended to be closed forever. So this is the idea in Macedonia, that the Tomely tombs were closed forever. And also in the Egyptian ideas, the tombs are closed forever. So when the Macedonians came to establish Alexandria, from the early beginning of the construction of the city, we found tombs are opened. From where they get this idea. In Macedonia, it's closed. In Egypt, it's closed. From where they get this idea, it's not after 100 years for mixture or something to say that because of the social construction of the cities, they invented this. But we found from the early beginning of the city, from where they get this idea. This is a question. For the Gamma chip, the Kline, it's astonishing for me to see it for the first time in Shadbi because of this great project which held by you and Kyriakos. But the unique facade of the Kline with the stela, the shape of the stela, I think there is some pigments or colors on it. I think it was colored and with a scene also. And it has the same shape with some stele and local slab of Macedonians, cavalrymen, like Xenos of Macedonia and Nicanor, the Macedonian also. There are two stele with the same shape. Before of making the stele with two columns holding the pediment. The first stele with Nicanor of the Macedonian and the Xenos of Macedonia, it's the same shape of the stela on the facade of the sarcophagus. It may be a connection or something like this of the people who were buried inside those Kline. For the two columns at the corner of Shadbi, can we consider that it could be an introduction of the heart pear-shaped piers for it was invented in Hellenistic times in Alexandria? Can we consider it like this? It's the beginning or introduction of the heart pear-shaped in the whole world, which after that was very used in Roman times until Roman times. I agree with you totally that it's not because of the burials in Shadbi, it's not for poor people, because we have some Hadra vases from Hadra Cemetery, not from Shadbi, with some inscriptions. It's told very rich persons were cremated and buried inside these pots we didn't find gold or something like this, but the inscription told some of them were ambassadors in Alexandria. So in Shadbi also they may be rich people. It's not necessary because we didn't find gold. They are not rich people. I want to thank you about this great project another time. So thank you.
Okay, 3 points. The first point is related to the discussion with Professor Planchos about the imitation and the inspiration of certain things. But we have to stress upon two facts. Yes, the Egyptian tombs were made to be locked forever, but there should be other constructions for rituals related to the dead and in occasions and mortuary temples and all these things are correlated with the tomb, and they are essential things. So there were practices for the dead during or throughout all the periods of Egyptian history. So they practiced funerary rites and rituals in Egypt and in Macedon as well, because, for example, we know that the laying out of the body in Greece was to be achieved or to be made in the house of the dead, before the ekphora, before the funeral, before carrying him into the tomb. But in Macedon, for example, there are some sources that speak about making the prothesis inside the tomb before locking it. These are kind of beliefs and rituals from one place and the other. They differ. So we cannot say from where, but actually from their minds and from their beliefs, from what they believed in. And all these ancient people had rituals, and even modern, had rituals for their dead. This is the first thing. The second thing was about...
It's only a comment about the stela on...
yes, yes. The whole Kline was painted, as you know. But the new thing in Shadbi is that the paintings in other Kline were imitating bedspreads, the bed of the living, with bedspreads with certain colors and certain strips. But here there is no bed strip, because they wanted this stele to be visible for the visitors. So it should have been colored, of course. The third thing is the two columns. Well, the heart-shaped is the three-quarters, three-dimensional column for the corners, and this appeared in Greece before. It's not for the first time appearing in Alexandria, but it's in Greece. I think in Greek architecture there is this three-quarters column. If they have it, why did not they execute it in Shadbi? This is the experimentality solution of Dr. Sobhi, and maybe the functionality and the strength, trying to strengthen the corners. Nobody knows.
Mm-hmm. May I comment as well? You want my comment as well or not?
Of course, I'm hearing you.
So, I think, first, why these courtyards exist? I think the answer is already around us. It's a necropolis, and the term necropolis is used specifically for Alexandria. It was described for the first time by Strabo, defined. A necropolis means it's a city. We don't design cities for any other reason but to be practical spaces for a lot of people that they have to be together at the same place. The same principle, I think, is applied also to the city of the dead. When you have a populous city like Alexandria and so limited space, you need to properly organize this place, while at the same time considering the different social hierarchies and so and so and so. So when you have to put 50 or 60 dead people in the same area, a courtyard might be a very practical solution by distributing you to different rooms. Then we have to look to the way that this city lives, in the way that what are their customs and what is their everyday life. And you give me pass with the comment, with your comment. What kind of rituals are taking place in these courtyards that we find always? An altar, big altar, not only the small altars that we found. What was going on in the city during the 3rd century BC? The city is a city of religious celebrations all the time. And these celebrations celebrate the recent past, most of the times. Let me mention only the cult, the royal cult, either in its individual form or in its dynastic form. The city creates links to the ancestors, to those that founded the city. Don't you forget, it's just 100 years in the time of Shadbi that the city has been discovered. Maybe 200 years is the time for the case of Mustafa Kamel. So while the kings of this city claim to be deified mortals, divinized mortals, why not our ancestors, let's say, that reside in Shadbi or in Mustafa Kamel to be our heroes, our family heroes, our social caste heroes, our cultural heroes, or whatever else kind of heroes. So yes, I think this is the reason why they do that, because they build, to my understanding, ideologies, they build rituals and customs, and of course every city, and especially a capital like Alexandria, would have its own distinctive character and style after that.
Okay, yeah, yes, please.
The appearance of the court, of the Bristile. And the first appearance of the court, of Bristile court, in the Hellenistic architecture. I followed this problem, and according to Winter, Hellenistic Architecture 2006, the first appearance of this element in funerary context is attested in Alexandria. So I think Professor Mona and Professor Kyriakos can stress or give us more confirmation or disagreement with this point. Okay, but I'll ask you another question. Why I was talking, Dr. Mona, you said the first half fluted column in Mustafa Kamel. Did your investigation in Shadbi reveal something that we don't know to doubt the reconstruction or drawing of Pritcha? Because Pritcha made drawings of half fluted columns in the Shadbi.
But there are others completely fluted.
In Shadbi.
Yes, the lower part. We have some fluted and some unfluted. But I doubt if they were originally unfluted, because there were damage that happened to the place, a very, very big damage.
Yes.
And, also spontaneous restoration, maybe by Breccia himself or in the 60s, because in the 60s many things changed in the place, and no reports have been written about what happened there. So we don't know, we are not sure that they are originally plain.
Yes, this is valuable response. Thank you. And last thing, just for the name Ammonios on the funerary stele from Shadbi, I have read something that the cult of Ammon and Isis was flourishing in Athens in the 5th century, and even one Strategos or Archon was nicknamed Anopeion, that come from his fondness in Egyptian cult and his relation to Anubis. So perhaps the name coming from the internationality of the temple of Zeus Ammon in the Siwa Oasis.
Yes,
and could come from. Yes, but I mean the name could be known in the Greek world earlier. The name Ammonion could be known in the Greek world earlier.
It is known before the Alexandria.
Yes,
Ammon is not an unknown figure in the Greek world. Just want to mention that the Siwa temple had visitors since the 5th century BC, and we have Ammon on coin made in Cyrenaica. I think the connection is not with the Ammon of meaning Ammon. It's the Ammon of Alexander in this time. The Ammon of the coin, the father of Alexander. So this idea, again, I think it goes around Alexander more than to the Egyptian god. I think so. And after all, Ammon, there is no evidence for Ammon in Alexandria yet, for the cult of Ammon in Alexandria yet. Which means that Ammon is a symbol for a very important divine symbol, again, as a father of Alexander the Great, carrying the same horns and so forth. Yeah, no, it's a prestigious name, and I can expect that. I would be shocked, let's say, in this cemetery, if we have an Anubas, if I would have other names that are inspired by Egyptian gods that we have so commonly in the 2nd century BC, in the 1st century and onwards. Yeah, I don't think it's cultural exactly. It's more the ideological background of the name of Ammon in that case that makes these people call themselves Ammonios, for example.
Any other question? Yes.
Dr. Abir Esen, the head of the Department of Greco-Roman Archaeology in the Manhur, and currently, a few days ago, the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Applied Arts in the Manhur University.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, my dear Professor. I would like to thank you for presentation, also the presentation of Kyriakos. I just would like to say something, a sort of comment about the idea of imitation. We can't consider the imitation doesn't exist because it exists. We also because we always see many influences on between Greek art, Hellenistic art here in Alexandria. We have also saw that in the facades, in the columns, in the orders, in the motifs itself. So if this is not imitation, at least there is influences that we can see everywhere in the Greek art here in Alexandria, Hellenistic art here in Alexandria, and I think also everywhere around the Mediterranean. That's it. Thank you.
Ibrahim Mustafa, you're here. Well, may I ask you to speak about El Abd? Just 1 minute. Tell people. Ibrahim Mustafa was working in El Abd from the beginning until the end, and he has a very, very thorough idea about the site. Please. Yes, Ibrahim.
Yes, he's coming.
Ibrahim is a senior inspector in the Ministry of Antiquities.
Thank you, Doctor, very much for your lectures. It means too much for us because we are working in the Eastern Cemetery for about 6 or 10 years now, and we have, because I'm coming from an Egyptology background, so I have very short information about the Eastern Cemetery, and always we ask Dr. Mona to come and visit our sites and our excavation, and she's a great help for us. For Al Abd, at first I wanted to comment about the courtyards because we found something when we were working in the site, that mostly the courtyards were part for the festivals that the people, relative to the owners of the tomb, they come to visit the tomb, but not to visit their ancestors or the deceased. They come to festivals their life. So we usually find objects related to daily life, and especially for parties. So we find a lot of oil lamps which were used with a lot of decoration, mostly erotic decoration. We found we found also so much of pots and plates filled with seafood, usually seafood and other kind of things, erotical statues, figurines, and a lot of this. Also, we found a very good representation of the Egyptian culture in this courtyard, because we usually found so much figurines of Amun, Pes, especially Pes, and other Egyptian deities. In lab excavation, we were excavating the site for 5 years, and we fought so much for this site, and actually Dr. Mona helped us so much in this case. It's salvage. It's not our site, so we can't stay forever in it. We excavated for the first 3 years, and we found that we have several levels of tombs. The oldest one, maybe it was a very early Hellenistic tomb, but we found that it was partly from the eastern side, that it was partly the slabs were taken from all the locales, and we didn't find the Hadra vases in its place. So we thought maybe that we are near the excavation of Neretsos for the Metropolitan. We didn't know if it's the true or not. And also we had from the Hellenistic period, what we saw that it's a chamber with 5 cleans, not only one. We saw that we have, at the first we have 1 clean, we have the restoration, the rest of it with chest decoration and Alexandrian decoration. And then when we completed the excavation, because there was a huge collapse on the area, we found that there are traces to another one beside it, another cleaning beside it, and we were very happy that we have a room with 2 cleanings. But after excavating in this area, we found that there are another 2 in the opposite side, and maybe there is the 5th one linking between the 2 sides. Lab was a very important site, and I can't talk about it because I have a lot of my colleagues working that worked with me in the site. Unfortunately, we didn't publish in it, so we are hoping to, with the help of Dr. Mona and our colleagues from the university, that we can do something soon about this site. We had discovered also a very unique type of tombs that were built inside the site from underground to up. It wasn't built. You didn't get to the tomb from a door from the level of the courtyard and locales, but you get to the tomb from up, and you get down to the court, and you have in the upper part you have a cistern for each tomb, and you have a place for celebration and the visitors of the tomb. We had made a lecture before at the society about the site, and I had the pleasure to talk about the site also in the RC annual meeting in 2017. We hope soon that we put our site for public, and with the help of Dr. Mona, we are planning to have an exhibition part about the excavation of Lab in the Greek-Roman Museum after the reopening, inshallah. Thank you.
Well done.
Before the opening.
Well done, excellent, yeah. Sounds like a fascinating site, huh? So, yeah, Dr. Brekoulaki for a last question. To the right, down there.
Thank you very much all for this discussion and the presentations. 2 months ago I was in Naples, and I visited the Ipogeo, the famous Ipogeo Cristallini, which is now open to the public. And it is, I was really astonished by, and I always am, by the similarities that they exist, in particular with Alexandrian monuments, because this is also dated to the late 4th, early 3rd century. So it is in the heart of Naples. You have, the 4-chamber hypogeum, which is carved in the local porous. You have paintings, and I just wonder how, yes, Hellenistic phenomena are complex, that's for sure. You never know exactly how something develops, and it always also bears some local characteristics. But still, there's a seed. And I think in Alexandria, the seed is from Macedonia, then it develops also in different ways. But there are also certain phenomena that are even more complex to understand. So I don't know if you have any idea, for example, how would you explain that such a complex as the one in Naples? Because afterwards we have also in Taranto, but there we know there's an indirect Macedonian, let's say, influence. And yet, could you have any explanation, for example, for such a phenomenon? Because I always wonder what happened there. And it's, have you seen it recently? Have you visited this monument?
No.
Because it's really very, very close to what you have.
Well, okay, I'm not astonished with that. We are in the Hellenistic period. It's one word answering this. It's the koine, the Hellenistic koine. Actually, the whole period is characterized by the connections between the people and the easy moving and displacement of lots of communities among the Hellenistic kingdoms. So people were in touch with each other, and I think Alexandria, especially Alexandria, as a center of commerce in the Mediterranean. It was in close contact with all Mediterranean countries through the merchants and commercial vessels. So it's not surprising.
You see, the interest is the early date of the monument. This is the interest, and in relationship with your monument. Exactly. It's really late fall. So this is what is particular to it. It's not of course in the third then you have many monuments, but at this period it's not that much. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it was an idea for you to consider it as well in your research.
It's a good idea to encourage us to visit.
Yes.
Good excuse to go.
Thank you.
Yes.
If I may also add that, as very commonly described the Hellenistic world today, to the point that I'm bored to hear this mobility of people means mobility of ideas. So yes, ideas, styles, and things travel around during the Hellenistic period. And I think, in fact, there is a sort of synchronization. It's not that everything travels from one place to another. People, more or less, in cases like this we discussed, might have some common ideas while being in their places. I see, for example, what happened in Cyprus. Cyprus has also a great tradition in rock-cut structures before the Hellenistic period. Egypt as well, Asia Minor as well. So there is a sort of synchronization that takes place in the Hellenistic period with the connectivity that comes after the formation of Oikoumenian and of the Hellenistic, let's say, map. As for specifically for Italy, I think Italy is particularly famous for being inspired by Egypt and Alexandria during the Hellenistic period, both in a negative and in a positive way. Talking about the positive, we know from literary sources that after Ptolemy the second, after Ptolemy II, there is already a Temple of Isis in Rome that works as an embassy of the Ptolemies there. So not only there is mobility of people and idea, but there is also context made by authorities in order this connection to exist. Yeah, and also in art. In art of Italy, you can see what would be this influence. The Hellenistic world, I think, especially for the Italians, opened a new exotic, new world that is called Egypt. And you can see, for example, in Palestrina mosaic. So you want to have, if you are Italian of that time, I mean, perhaps you would like to have in your house a garden that looks like this garden, a temple that looks this temple, and perhaps a tomb that looks like a tomb that someone saw while visiting Alexandria, if I may say.
And the very last one, yeah. Please.
First of all, thank you so much for such a fascinating lecture and a very comprehensive discussion. Thank you. A special thank for our professor, Dr. Muna. First of all, I rather have a comment and a question. I'll start with the question first. And sorry, to begin with, mind my incomplete knowledge of the funerary architecture, because this is a bit of my speciality. But Doctor, you have mentioned, talking about Mustafa Kemal Cemetery, that there was a stoa in the cemetery, and you kind of assimilated it to the Attalus stoa, which is now have turned to be the Athenian Institute of Classical Studies. So on what conditions were there be a stoa in such a funerary complex?
No, there might be a kind of misunderstanding in this. I didn't mention that there is a stoa inside Mustafa Pasha. The stoa is a place, is a secular place,
yes,
for the agora,
teaching and
for
yes,
the
and the agora.
For any other thing. I said that the partially fluted columns in Mustafa Pasha precede the earliest ones that appeared in the stoa of Delos, of the island of Delos in Greece. Mm-hmm. These are end of 3rd century, while Mustafa Pasha is beginning of 3rd century. And we compare.
So it's the matter of the column figures.
The partially fluted columns that appeared in Delos and in Athens in the stoa of Talos.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor. There's another comment about the idiosyncrasy.
Dr. Omnia is a classicist specialized in medicine, Greek medicine. Yes.
Another thing is just the idiosyncrasy of the illusionary doors that you kept mentioning every now and then, that there are illusionary doors. So are they more of the idiosyncrasy to the Egyptian side or to the Greek side?
And this I would leave Dr. Sarakita to answer, but they have nothing to do with Egyptian false doors. Dr. Sarah?
First of all, thank you to Mona and for answering your comment, Dr. Omnia, the false doors in the ancient Egyptian architecture had a far different concept and significance. It was used to enable the soul to enter and to the offerings to be received by the deceased. But the false doors in the Greek architecture was more as a decorative shape of, which was commonly used in the Greek tombs and also in the Alexandrian tombs. So the false doors in the ancient Egyptian architecture had a very remarkable religious significance related to the soul and related to the offerings, how the offerings would be reached to the deceased himself.
Okay. As far as I can dare to say, the Ba or the Ach, which is one kind of soul in the Egyptian beliefs, used to leave the tomb daily, on daily basis, and comes back at the end of the day. So it has there should be a door that the Ach should pass through. This is non-existing in the Greek beliefs. Mm-hmm. The windows and doors are imitation of houses. This is the dwelling of the dead. I mean, the tomb is the dwelling of the dead, is the house of the dead. So it should look like the house of the living, or in their mind, this is the house with doors and windows.
Okay, I think that was it for today. Let's call it for tonight, because Mark has already started giving me hard looks. So in case we want him to throw us out, let's call it. So we reassume our meeting tomorrow. Mark, you're going to give the details? Okay. Let's thank our speakers once again, please.